Present.
Councilmember Keel,
Here.
Councilmember Kerr,
Here.
Councilmember Cormet, Councilmember Sullivan,
Here.
Councilmember Fistead,
Present.
Mayor Riley.
Present.
There are 6 members present.
First item on our agenda is discussion of the workforce housing policies in Summit County. And for that, I'll turn it over to whichever town manager would like to respond to the interim or the soon to be first.
What do you think, gentlemen? Flip?
Oh, this is all gonna be.
Yeah, it's coming in the annual.
So I'll take this one.
Okay.
Jim. Oh, by the way, before we start, I want to welcome our newly hired town manager, and that will be made official this evening, John Crone. This is his first official council meeting, although he's attended the last 2. So again, on behalf of the council, welcome.
Thank you.
And is everybody met Gabby? But she's not here.
Yes, this is Gabby's first one too.
I met her today. I met her today as well.
When Gabby comes back in, we'll introduce her. So with that, over to you, Mr. Crowe.
Okay, as you all know, we're struggling to get our housing program up and running, with the county. So as a result of that, we need to make sure that we are in line with the goals of the housing authority, and we'll let our town planner, Lindsay Hirsch, take it from there.
So with that being said, this staff report memo is in response to disappointment with regards to, the response we got from the Southern Combined Housing Authority related to, indicating that the town did not have, any of the policies related to housing. So what I did was, at the direction of the council on the 25th of April, is I just basically pulled from the countywide comprehensive plan and the Snake River master plan, those policies. I did it in total of both documents. I didn't arbitrarily take anything out. I just basically copied and pasted. Now, I think I owe you an apology. I forgot that you're not used to quite yet master plans and utilizing those types of documents. Again, I apologize, but I need to do a better job at educating both council and to the planning commission with regards to what master plans are and how they're utilized in comparison to the land use development code. Again, this is the important part. The land use development code is law. It is regulatory in nature. The master plans, including the one that you will eventually adopt, is advisory. You need to consider it. You need to consider totality, right? Totality. No. You can pick and choose what you want out of that document. I fully appreciate the potential, I think, that some of the council members had with regards to, oh my God, what are we adopting potentially? Again, like we did with the land use development code, not to confuse you with regulatory as opposed to advisory, but we adopted in part, at least, the county's land use development code. Will we be utilizing every damn page of the land use development code? No. Same thing with the master plan. This is a piecemeal approach that we need. It is a tool with it's a toolbox with a bunch of tools in it. You do not have to utilize every tool in the toolbox. But with that being said, we do need, in the interim, until we adopt our own master plans, because a lot of the land use applications you're going to hear in the relative near future has findings for review or approval or denial. And a majority of what council hears, there's a criteria in there that you consider the applicable master plans. So if we don't have master plans in place, when these development applications come through, that's quite problematic. Can't come up with a finding. So I do not mean to alarm any of you with regards to all those goals, policies, and actions that I pulled from the master plans that, quite frankly, you tonight are going to consider potentially adopting. But I think not everyone is applicable. And I'll tell you, not every, when the plan was adopted, not every planning commission and maybe BOCC member at the time agreed with every policy either. That's normal. It is an instrument to utilize as you see fit, not regulatory. So I hope I hope I didn't alarm any of you too badly. I think there are some policies in there that certainly won't be utilized in the near future, nor will they carry over to your own master plan. You're going to develop your own master plan with your own set of goals, policies. That's going to take a little bit of time. We are going to start moving forward with that with a private consultant. But until then, I think it is an adequate method to utilize for some development review applications that you're going to get. So with that being said, do you have questions for staff?
So, there are probably a lot of questions, but the first one I would have is, if we don't accept this one, you said we move on to something else, what's the interim issues that we would face, and how long would it take to develop our own?
Great question there. I'll work backwards. I believe, and this is best guess, is once we retain a consultant, I think it would be reasonable 6 to 9 months to actually adopt a master plan. There's a tremendous amount of public outreach, which I believe this council is really looking for. And that takes time and effort, and but my best guess is 6 to 9 months. The other portion of your question is what would happen if we don't adopt a master plan? I don't know how you would render decisions for some land use applications that are likely coming your way in the very near future. Because that criteria needs to be. I really wish Jennifer was here. Maybe we could come back to her at a later time to address that issue.
Councilmember Pfister.
So I have considerable concerns about adopting the Summit County Master Plan. Although it was just established that it's not technically law like our land use code, it's my understanding that a master plan does establish direction and provide specific recommendations for future physical development. Just like Lindsay said, if we don't have it, we can't make certain assessments on proposals. And I would be horrified if this is the standard that we're setting for some of these policies. Because this does in fact establish goals, policies, actions, and implementation strategies. And I would fear that this would be held up as the gold standard when we move forward to actually establish our master plan. I think establishing a master plan is so vital to Keystone's credibility and success in the future. And we have worked very hard to beat the drum about the fact that we wanted to get out from under the county's regulations that didn't necessarily fit the needs and desires of the Keystone community. I feel like we would be slapping our community in the face by adopting something that we've tried so hard to separate ourselves from. Not saying that there aren't some lessons, some findings that we could use as a reference in development of our own plan, but I am against developing or adopting this as is.
How would you propose to handle the interim 6 to 9 months while plan is developed.
I'm not sure if we need to hit the pause button and take a couple weeks to really assess what elements of this plan we could guess have relevance to Keystones, but I mean, I think part of connecting and developing a master plan has to do with going out to the community and really taking the temperature of the community about what our priorities and our standings are on many of these issues. But I don't think we can continue as business as usual with what we've said we're trying to get away from in regards to planning and zoning and development. And so if that's taking a couple weeks and maybe adopting certain elements of this as a skeleton master plan, I'm fine with that, but I will be going on record as saying I will be voting no as written.
Councilmember Keel.
More of a backup question a little bit, since I've been out for a few weeks. In terms of how this is relating to the housing authority, I'm nervous that we're being pressured into a county policy simply to appease that. And I'm wondering what our other options are. I mean, I feel like we're now just discussing this because it's popped up, you know?
Yes.
Well, let's back up. We are really right now off topic because we're discussing now workforce housing policy in Summit County. We're not discussing the Snake River and County Comprehensive Plan. That's the next agenda item.
Okay.
So what I believe the intent, staff's intent of this was to give you an idea of what the current county policies were to educate us for any future discussions with the SDHA. It was not to recommend that this be our housing policies.
That is correct. I apologize for any confusion. Again, it is, I believe the Summit Combined Housing Authority letter indicated that the town didn't have any policies or applicable.
Or they didn't know.
So,
What we
I mean,
They didn't know what we believed. They didn't say we didn't have any policies. They didn't know what our basically what our approach was.
and by adopting, albeit temporarily, these master plans, it certainly answers adequately that question.
But haven't we also adopted the comprehensive, we've adopted the development code, which addresses workforce housing from a
Yes.
policy standpoint as well. But that's a
It
regular.
certainly addresses it, but this pretty much completes that issue with regards to policy.
Yeah, I'm convinced that in the longer run, which is why one of the concerns I have going forward, that we are going to want to have, separate from the comprehensive plan, our own master plan for workforce housing. Right now, and I believe the Snake River master plan, and that's going to take time to develop because there's a lot of information we do not have. Snake River master plans lumped us in with all the other housing requirements within Summit County. And Keystone is unique as it relates to all the other towns. The county has a very high, we're heavily reliant on the tourist population. But the difference between us and the other towns is that we're a direct contributor to tourism with the resort of our resort of short-term rentals, with our restaurants and our businesses. And you just have to look in this community today in shoulder season and count how many businesses are currently open in shoulder season. So whereas Silverthorne and Dillon and Breckenridge, they have more stable businesses and operations. So they have a lot of what I'll call workforce housing. They have a lot of tourism support businesses that are all part of the tourism industry, but they're support businesses. We don't have nearly as many of those and that's gonna drive the demographics of any future workforce housing we have. I'm not sure that, I'm not sure yet until we see numbers of what our requirements are for, seasonal housing, or if we have them. Right now, we satisfy Vail Resort seasonal housing needs, but we certainly don't satisfy anyone else's, anyone that doesn't work for Vail Resorts seasonal housing needs, with the workforce housing in our community. And this was all started to come to me as I read, Councilmember Thisted's, treatise that she sent out last night to me and a couple of others as a first draft. It's going to the council members. So I think in the longer term, we're going to want to develop our own master plan to say, this is really what we need, the type of housing that we need, and the AMIs that we need to have support our housing. We have a tremendous number of very low AMI people in this community to support our workforce. Much different, again, than other towns. I dare say that probably a vast majority of our workforce is probably in the under 50% AMI category because, again, of the direct restaurant support, of the direct support of the SDRs. So we need to get our arms around that, and that's going to take time, and a little bit of time instead. But again, that, as I look at housing policy, so I wouldn't necessarily support at this time adopting housing policy. In this respect, I'm in Councilmember Thisted's on the housing issue side of it. I think the comprehensive master plan for the code is enough to get us by until we have time to work the issue. Before we can work those issues, before we can develop that plan, we need $5A so we can fund it and go forward. And right now, we do not have $5A. $5A is what we would be using to fund the development of that master plan and the approach to this community in the future.
Acknowledging what you said about allowing you the tools you need to be able to do your job and assess plans, that proposals that are submitted. And could you provide a scenario in which we would receive a proposal that was not testable or reviewable based on the code and would require this type of backup? I mean, we don't want to tie your hands or be a pain in the neck and not do developers.
Councilmember Christian, I'd ask you to please defer that question.
Okay.
Because that's, we're currently, the agenda item currently is workforce housing policy.
To be continued.
All right, any other comments of the staff? Need any direction from us right now in the workforce housing area?
Just a point of clarification. Did I understand you correctly by saying that maybe the comprehensive plan goals that I listed in my staff report related to housing are more general in nature and might be more palatable, comparable to what the council feels like?
I didn't say that.
Okay, I just want a point of clarification that.
I'm not sure what the goals for in the workforce housing arena need to be.
Okay.
But as we go forward, and I don't think there's no imperative to adopt a workforce housing policy at this time. I don't believe the SCHA objection was over lack of a policy. They wanted to understand the direction that we're going, and I think we could work in that manner.
I apologize for the misunderstanding.
Yeah. But I could be, any other council members have it, any different council members?
I appreciate your proposal, that this could be a response to this suggestion that they don't understand the town. So Mayor Riley, I would ask, what do you recommend that we present to the SEHA in terms of their questions about how do we stand on that?
Well, I believe the first step with the SCHA, first of all, find out what the concerns are. Right now, we don't know. because they really haven't told us. The second piece of that is something that Councilmember Thisted put together, is understanding what type of programs each of those towns have that they're using to spend $5 with. And I think that education piece can occur probably within the next week when that information gets set up. In addition, the other piece of it is understanding what the workforce housing situation in Keystone is, and putting that together. And I plan to do some work in that area, but just to give you a top level idea of the workforce housing is, we have the second most workforce housing of any town in Summit County. The only town that has more workforce housing than Keystone is Breckenridge. They have significantly more workforce housing than we do. Right now, we have, inside the town, we have 95 units of deed restricted for sale units. 66 of those are in West Hills, 16 are in Hidden River, and there's 13 other units spread out among various condominium associations. All of those units are currently managed by Summit County using the Summit County Housing Authority. The deed restrictions are managed using the Housing Authority, and eligibility to purchase those homes or rent those homes is qualified through the Housing Authority. In addition to that, we have 321 units of Vail Resorts employee housing. 45 units of low-income housing, and 36 units of Vail Resorts employee housing in Wintergreen. That gives us a total in the town of Keystone today of approximately 491 units of workforce housing. And these are condominium units, not beds. When you count the bed count, it's significantly higher. In addition to that, Summit County in the Keystone area, and by Keystone area, I'm predominantly talking the 5 parcels that are not in Keystone, that were not included in corporation because Vail Resorts didn't bring them in. In those 5 parcels, we have 116 units of housing in Wintergreen. We have 20 units in sagebrush housing, which are largely bunk beds and accommodate 200 to 300 employees. And we have, in addition, 12 units that were built because of Keystone requirements in Dillon Valley Vista. Those 12 units were the requirement for those generated from the Keystone PUD in Brown when the River Run townhomes were built, and the county offered up the land for those in the Dillon Valley. In Dillon Valley. We have echo going. All right, and so we have the 12 units in Dillon Valley. They have no requirement. That was in Wintergreen parcel, that land was generated as was initially set aside for an elementary school. The school district indicated they didn't have a need for it, so the land was then transferred in ownership to the county, who then provided it. So in essence, Keystone really provided that land with our PUD. So as we look at that, so that gives you an idea of what we have today. When you add all of that up, that's almost 640 units, 639 units housing in the Keystone area. Councilmember Sullivan.
And I'm backing up a little bit. That's amazing numbers, by the way. is that I think when I look at the agenda items 2 and 3, there was confusion that they were intertwined. And so when I'm asking the question. 2 is, we probably need to think about what is our policy, maybe document it at some point, and then share with the housing authority and others. So the thought was earlier that I did, that the discussion on point 3 is related to that directly.
Yeah.
And that was that 2 was a subset of 3. And so I think that was confusion.
I think the intent of this agenda item was to educate the council on the policies that exist in Summit County today, as it applies to Keystone and in other towns today. So,
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make it clear. I think that was the confusion we were having. I was having.
well, that's why I tried to very clearly separate it.
And if I may add, Mayor, Proposition 123 has recently just raised a ton of money for housing in the state. But they have some stringent requirements on fast tracking projects, things like that, that we'll have to adopt to before we go after any of those loans.
So my question is, what is the next step for point number 2? What do you recommend?
I think probably the next step for point number 2 is the meeting that we've requested with the housing authority to get into a discussion of exactly what their concerns are. We could give them an idea of the direction that we believe the town should head in, which is develop the detailed master plan for workforce housing in the town, but we're going to need some time to do that because it's different from it is overall different from the direction overall in the county because we are different. I think it's an opportunity to show them the potential land around here, the 6 acres of land around this building. We have the potential to purchase, but we don't have the ability to do that without the $5,800. And to find out what the questions are and respond to the questions. But to do that, we have to be educated, I believe, and smart in what all the other towns are doing. That's what council member this put together.
Okay.
To give you an idea of the program. Frankly, when you look at the programs, other than purchase and building, there's not a lot. It's on the margins.
I agree. It would be a matter of redevelopment and different zoning considerations we need to make, because right now we have the overlay zone, but we might have to reopen and consider our zones.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we need to overall, as you look at it. But that's something, again, we need that workforce housing study to understand what type of housing we really need to meet our needs. And I believe, by the way, as a result of reading the master plans, reading Mr. Hirsch's staff report, and reading Councilmember Thisted's paper that she put together, I believe that for Keystone, I believe the data will show, but we have to get the data, that the workforce, our seasonal housing requirements that we have in Keystone that we are unable to meet today are driving problems in the other communities because we have people in seasonal housing in the other communities that could be long-term housing for full-time employees, when in fact, if we had the seasonal housing in Keystone, that housing would be freed up to long-term housing. And so that's the type of thing I think we need to really get our arms around in a long-term policy. But again, we need more data, more information. This all came together in the last 48 hours of reading data, reading some information, and that's why we became convinced we need a master plan. Particularly for workforce housing. Councilman Kerr.
Okay,
understand. I was going to say, of course, we intend a master plan, but I appreciate the idea of a master plan for workforce housing. Excuse me. So if I understand the conversation in the last few minutes, and let's discuss whether this is what we agree to. We are going to essentially understand better what SCH is looking for, what their questions are, what their concerns are. And we believe that we will not be able to necessarily completely meet all their questions until we have a better handle on the housing situation, not only in Keystone, but in other municipalities.
No, I believe we're gonna be able to answer the questions.
Okay, the questions that we don't know yet.
No, we don't, and some of them, maybe we don't know, because we are different, and we need time to go develop that, but we also need the money to be able to do that.
So I guess my only concern, I think all of that is valid. The workforce master plan will take a little more longer time. So I would like to specify that council should agree to any principles or concepts that we put forward to SCHA as to how we feel about the future of affordable housing or workforce housing. Does that sound reasonable? That we would come together and we would agree on whatever, whether it was as paper or whatever?
I think we'll have we should, but we have a free flow discussion, and that meeting will occur as early as Monday.
But that's not with the council, right?
That's with the housing authority, yeah.
But that's, and who's going to that? You're going to go
No,
to that?
I would envision the
Because
whole
we
council,
consider this
the
as
whole
a,
council will be going to that, will be
So-
invited to that.
if I understand, this is, have we already been invited?
No, but we're anticipating that that will be on the next SCHA meeting day, which is 20th, which is Monday.
Okay, so this, we should consider this a fact finding and a question identifying.
But I
situation.
would hope to be able to answer any questions that they have at that meeting, as we go forward. And there may be questions that are from broad term policy of what our mix is gonna be in the future. I don't think we can answer that question yet. We've got to go.
Don't want you to get ahead
We're
of
not
this,
gonna.
just to make them happy.
No, no, we're not. I would absolutely refuse to do that.
I trust you.
But I believe that this parcel of land will be integral to anything we do in the future.
And I have the impression that you're not familiar with this, which we've never formally voted on, but I think that our discussions have indicated that interest.
Yes, that's what I mean. Would anyone, maybe I should ask a question, would anyone object to having this parcel of land be a key part of any discussion with the SCHA?
No, it's ideal. And point of information or clarification, I think what I've heard Ken refer to in terms of answering questions for the housing authority is referring back to the existing codes that we've already adopted, the resort overlay policy that the county and granted us.
Right.
So the existing status of Keystone's planning and zoning
Well,
versus the
is there
future.
an overlay relevant anymore?
What do you
Yeah,
mean
it
by-
is. Because of short-term rentals. I mean, we've been declared a resort zone, and so that,
Oh, from a short-term rental
Yeah.
standpoint, you're talking about the
That's not the question.
that was the question you asked. Yeah.
but he would be referring to what is rather than what.
Have we formally adopted that Keystone zoning resort zoning overlay as our sense
That will
of
be,
the town?
that will be discussed
That's what he's saying.
as when we go into the short-term rental discussion later this afternoon. That we're starting that
I
process.
think we're getting ahead.
We're getting ahead, and we have a lot of stuff going in parallel.
Yes.
It is a bit intertwined.
They're at a point. So yeah, the intent would be to lay out this, and then if there's specific questions, answer them. You know, it would be hard, I would think, to object to the fact that if we adopt the county master plan as an interim, that it would be hard for them to object that that's not in line, since it's the current policy in place here. That that we have adopted the development codes, which is the same that had existed prior to the incorporation, to say that we don't have at least an initial direction or that we're maintaining status quo until we figure out where we want to go.
Which probably brings us back to why Lindsay had proposed these, so
And propose what?
that we take a look at these two items.
Oh,
When we
I,
get to them on the agenda.
yeah. Well, no, you proposed the other one separately, that other was on this agenda separately, even before the workforce housing issue came. Any other questions? Councilmember Davis, did you ever hear that?
Yeah, to clarify, we received, and I thought everyone received it, but I received it, a letter from the chair of
Everyone
SCHA
received it.
saying they were meeting on the 16th, and it was her intent to set a meeting between our council and their board on the 20th here.
Well, we requested.
We requested a meeting a couple of weeks ago.
Yet my understanding is they were going to discuss this before they meet up with us.
Yes,
Yeah, but it was her hope to have a meeting on Monday, so.
any other questions? Then would it be acceptable informally with the council to approach that meeting in the manner that I recommended? Listen, explain our desire, long-term desire to acquire this property for workforce housing needs, and to rely on the existing policies, existing Summit County policies that we've adopted as interim for the town, and explain that in the longer term, we'd like to have a master plan of our own.
And to relay your understanding of all the workforce housing that is already here.
Yeah, and
I'm sure that's
yeah.
not understood.
Councilmember Davis.
So, just to clarify, because we do have things that are running in parallel and related, and I think it's confusing sometimes to the conversation. Will the workforce housing master plan be part of our bigger master plan, or will this be done separately?
That's a decision is gonna have to be made, recommended by staff and how we approach it.
Okay.
My guess, getting out of my lane here, my guess is there's gonna be a sufficient amount of additional data we're gonna need to develop a true detailed master plan for workforce housing. It talks in specifics about where we're going. I don't know, and that's gonna take some time.
So, if I may.
Yeah,
It could go various ways. However, I envision the Highway 6 corridor study and affordable housing will be the forerunners of the elements, the primary elements of your master plan. So I believe, at least for the time being, that those two elements would be part of your master plan, not standalone documents, but things could change.
Councilmember.
And then how do we intertwine that if we're talking zoning variances, for like how Valerie had mentioned, we might want to make some zoning changes for housing, for workforce housing, you know, how would we do that consecutively while also making, you see what I'm saying, while making a master plan? They would be two separate, yet they would have to run together in order to complete either, right?
That's a toughie, but say hypothetically, and again, we're going to.
Hypothetically, yeah.
Don't use the word variance, as it relates to zoning. Say hypothetically, an application for a rezoning or PUD amendment came in. And not to be redundant, but part of the criteria for decision, a finding for you to process and render a decision on that application application is consideration of workable master plans. So, again, I wish Jennifer was here to help me out on this one, but I would be, as a staff member, hard pressed to come up with a finding that it meets that criteria if indeed you don't have a master plan.
Again, can I defer the discussion till we get to the next agenda item? We're talking workforce housing, we're not talking the master plan yet.
Well, I'm trying to figure out if we are discussing establishing a workforce housing plan, how do we do that outside of having a master plan?
Because I think
Part of the master plan.
council
But
member,
it's like a chicken and an egg sort of
No.
situation, like how can you have, that's my question.
I'll let Lindsay answer that question.
I guess technically, if that was a huge stumbling block, I guess we could adopt a housing master plan, if you will, prior to the adoption of all the other elements. It would be a little unusual, but I don't see why we couldn't do that. It would be a sort of a, I'm going to call it subdivision, but it's not. Yeah, I believe that you could potentially adopt your own housing master plan. But again, I need to warn you, it is, as Valerie can attest, it is incredibly complicated, and it's got a very, very long history with regards to the way the county evolved with regards to the regulation of affordable housing. It's all over the board. With that being said, it is what it is. It needs to be considered and analyzed, like Ken said, with regards to this is what we have, and move forward with a plan to certainly acknowledge what we have, but the way we want to move forward from that point forward, and maybe mechanisms to potentially fix some antiquated issues.
So I think what you've said is an affordable housing plan can either be incorporated in the master plan in that process
Yes.
at that time, or if it was needed, a standalone plan could be developed as part of that.
Yes. But even that, due to the complexity of it, will take some time.
None of this is fast. Further on, again, back on topic again, on discussion of workforce housing policies in Summit County. Were there any questions on the policy side? This has been an education session, I believe. The second part.
Yes, I have one question. How old is that comprehensive plan from the county, do you know?
It was most recent, sure, 20.
Did they just revise that?
They're in the midst of revising it. They're over 10 years old.
Yeah.
They're certainly over, I believe 2010, 2009,
Okay.
were the last amendments
That
to
sounds
this plan.
appropriate, thanks.
Councilmember Fiske, could you, I'm putting you on the spot, if you're not comfortable, say so, we'll just deal with the paper product that you've developed. Could you run through some of the housing programs that the various towns have?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. I think it's important to point out, prior to going into each of the individual towns, that there's overarching, Summit County controls the unincorporated areas of the county. So they have their own affordable housing programs that apply to the unincorporated part of the county. And at the same time, they also have established agreements and relationships with some of the towns that they help implement and direct. So there's a lot of crossover and gray area when you're trying to tease out whether or not this is a county program or a town program. Does anybody have any questions about that? For instance, they do have a joint master plan with the town of Breckenridge. But on the other hand, they don't have a formal plan with Dillon, but they seem to be administering all the housing plans in Dillon. So I'll move on to some of the programs. So for
Let me
instance,
ask you a question. Is the county administering those programs, or is the SCHA administering those programs for the town of Dillon?
it's very hard to suss that out. From what I can tell, the primary example that I was able to identify is the National Forest Service project. When I spoke with the city planner, I don't know what his name is. Planner from Dillon, because Dillon doesn't have a formal master plan related to affordable housing, they're not even sure how to answer some of those questions, whether it seems to be more the county, but it's all in cooperation with the Summit Housing Authority. But there also seems to be a trend towards coming up with one master plan that governs everyone in the county. So I found it very hard to separate one from the other, county versus Summit Housing Authority. That wasn't a good answer, but that's.
But, you know, there's one other thing that all the towns in the county have done, and that is do a needs assessment, and they update it every couple of years. And they never gain on it, by the way, but they've, at the same time, building a lot of housing. For Dillon, you know, it's a target-rich environment. You can just about come up with whatever kind of project you want, because there's a need for that kind of project that's shown up in that needs assessment in probably double and triple figures. So, you know, you don't have to have a master plan necessarily to make some decent decisions about what kind of housing to develop. That's one thing. In Breckenridge, I might add, I know that they've had their own housing plan for quite a while. The Joint Upper Blue talks about the policies and all, but the town has done a lot of additional study on top of what was done, you know, to assess the needs in the county, and they have, you know, built a variety of things over the years. So they're working on a plan that is internal, not a county plan.
But it seems to be in conjunction with the county because they have that joint housing plan, master plan with the county.
The Joint Upper Blue,
Yeah.
or isn't the Joint Upper Blue, or is that a separate plan?
I'm not aware of a separate plan.
Okay.
But there are certainly projects in the town limits that are joint ventures with.
Yeah.
And like in the town of Dillon, there are projects like the Forest Service compound that were outside of the town limits, but is a cooperative project between the town and the county, similar to what Lake Hill over in Frisco is a cooperative project. Nelly's Neighborhood, I believe, is a cooperative project as well. The Smith Ranch was a cooperative project as well, I believe. There was county money and town of Silverford money in that project as well. In the case of Dillon, as you pointed out, Dillon is basically a build-out. They had, 7 open vacant residential lots that have not been built on in the town. So any future workforce housing in Dillon, if it's not, is either going to be out of the town limits, or, which is what the master plans recommend, by the way, is to consider annexation or bringing or properties outside your limits, or it's going to be as a result of redevelopment.
Do you want me to address?
So what I'd recommend, you know, housing help for those, just talk to.
Like these to locals and some of those.
Yeah, those guys. That's
Okay.
what I think, just understanding the nature of the type of program.
And I'll send out this document that really details all this, and I also have a glossary at the end, because there are a lot of terms that I think are unfamiliar, at least to me. So I'm assuming they might be unfamiliar to others that you need to know when you're assessing some of these programs. The county had a lease to locals program that actually they've been phasing out in 23 and 24, but the program provided grant incentives for owners of short-term rental properties to convert to long-term leases. And it started as a partnership between Summit County and Breckenridge. It provided grants to homeowners to offer below market rate leases while still generating revenue similar to what they would have accrued through their short-term rental potential. The landlords were allowed to identify the tenants and then they applied for that program, but it was suspended as of this year and they didn't accept any new applications as of 2023. And they did consider briefly this year, and we sat in on some of the conversations in the housing authority meetings, they considered converting the lease to locals program to a program model that supported businesses, and they went out and did some surveys among businesses to say, you know, would you guys be willing to subsidize some of this, this workforce housing and then manage finding tenants? And they said, absolutely not, we're not interested. So that got killed before it got off the ground. I'm not going to go too much more into that because that one has been suspended. There's a buy down program. The county purchases market rate units and deed restricts the unit. The resales of the unit have to be below market sales price. So the next one is housing helps. The county pays an owner or buyer up to 15% of the market value of the unit to place a deed restriction on the home. And the restriction requires a local worker to occupy the unit, and it has no rent or appreciation cap on it. One of the inconsistencies that I observed throughout some of the programs, Ken already alluded to. Some of the programs in the towns are very specific when they do deed restrictions that those affordable housing units have to give preference to people who work within that municipality. And then if there aren't viable applicants from within, working within that community, then they open it up to the broader county. But those are things that I think Keystone is really going to have to give some consideration to when we're putting affordable housing policy in place. Another big one that seems to be a trend from the county and from the state has to do with accessory dwelling units, and the county has really gotten into this big time. They provide ADU assistance, which means the county will reimburse up to $60,000 of the cost of constructing a new accessory dwelling unit. And they will provide funding to create new ADUs in existing homes, and they will also provide funding to convert non-compliant ADUs into compliant ADUs. And so there's some detail in here about how they do that. They provide stock plans, which are building plans to people who are interested in that, so people don't have to put the money forward to come up with plans. And they also provide modular home options for accessory dwelling units that the county will partially fund. Some of the larger themes had to do with land and housing asset acquisition and management for workforce housing. So one example of that is they purchase lodges and hotels in partnership with Breckenridge to convert to affordable housing. I believe they've also done some of that in Silverthorne, where they're buying some of the older hotels and converting them into affordable housing units. They took a master lease of hotels of the Alpine Inn in Frisco. That's another example.
But that's the case where they leased the entire facility and then subleased it out to workforce housing.
Exactly. So the county trends really focus on policy changes, which I think is really laid out in their comprehensive plan, which is why I would hesitate to adopt that. Workforce housing development, and also because many of the towns in the county are built out, would be land and housing acquisition and redevelopment of what's already there. Let me fast forward to the town of Breckenridge. I think it was interesting to point out that the town of Breckenridge had dedicated workforce housing as early as 1988. I found that to be a very interesting statistic, and they are currently at 93% of their build out. So again, their focus has to be primarily on redevelopment.
Okay, I'd like to point out Keystone has had dedicated workforce housing since the seventies.
Yes. So there is a long
Specifically,
history of
you
it.
guys.
Yeah, 73.
And Breckenridge has various plans and, studies on their workforce housing needs. One of the things that one of Breckenridge's strategies, is annexations, which Ken referred to. Local municipalities are expanding their jurisdictions by taking over adjacent land from unincorporated areas. And I wonder if with the U.S. Forest Service project in Dillon, that they're relying on Dillon's sewer and water, if that's one of their goals, or if the county will retain control over that, as well as Nellie's in Frisco, because it's just outside of town limits. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes ultimately, where they reside with the town or with the county.
Well, the property will reside in the county.
So you
I
don't-
don't think Dillon wants that property. In fact, they've said they won't take that property. Because again, that assumes, yes, maintenance responsibilities for maintaining the roads, providing police support and the rest of that, without any tax income coming in. But they can put people who live, work in town up in that property.
Mhm.
I think Dillon's got on record stating that.
But they don't want it. Breckenridge also takes advantage of the accessory dwelling units. They do land banking and new development, so the town acquires land for the purpose of constructing new affordable housing units. They've built both rental and for sale affordable housing on town land that they've acquired. And there are some examples that you can reference when you receive this document. They do lots of deed restrictions for rental and owned properties to ensure affordable housing for local employees. And that, I think, best example was the first program that I discussed from the county, but that's being discontinued. And I'm not sure exactly why that was discontinued, or if that's a model that some of the towns will pick back up.
I read in the paper, they said it was too expensive.
That's prohibitive.
Yeah. If you look at the way it worked in Breckenridge, it was about $10,000 a unit a year. $9,200 a year.
Some of the other strategy are fee waivers. In June of 22, the county commissioner waived all county fee requirements for local resident affordable housing developments. And some of those fees, an example, one of those fees might be a water tap fee. And a water tap fee is a fee paid to the department that covers the cost of actually putting in the infrastructure of a new water pipe to the units. And those can be very cost prohibitive. For instance, I read a statistic that in North Carolina, water tap fees are as low as $1,000, but in Colorado, because of our geography and availability of water, they're upwards of $12,000 to $13,000 for a water tap.
In
So
Keystone, it's about 5 to 6.
okay. But in some communities, waiving those fees can be a considerable discount for people who are developing affordable housing.
That is a tool that's available to Frisco, Breck, Dillon, and Silverthorne, because they have their own, the town owns the water system. In our case, we do not own the water system, the Snake River Water District does, so we don't have the power to waive the fee. We can ask the water district to.
Another strategy they use are density waivers. And I'm going to try not to infuse any editorial into this, but Breckenridge takes advantage of a provision in the joint Upper Blue Master Plan that allows them to transfer units, density units, into different areas, which would increase height and density. And that's something that I think we really need to discuss in relation to Keystone, how we feel about density waivers and increasing density, and whether or not affordable housing should be allowed to be exempt from density transfers and considerations. What else? Trying to think. Oh, it's just.
Yeah, I think you've covered
I mean, those are the primary strategies that different towns use.
different towns are using. That just gives you an idea. You get more detail later. Is there any other discussion on that item? Or they just realized I've blown the whole.
And I think it's hard to put any of this in context until you read the entire document, because it's really complicated.
The next item of discussion for today is the Snake River and countywide comprehensive plans. I'll turn that over to the town manager again.
And I will turn it right over to our community development director.
So, it's interesting that we ran these two agenda items back to back. For the sake of trying not to be too redundant, the state mandates that local municipalities have master plans. As we did with the land use and development code, for this interim period of time, it is suggested, right or wrong, that we adopt the countywide master plan and the Snake River master plan. And again, advisory documents that need to be considered with many majority of the land use applications you will be hearing in the relative near future. There are various components of these master plans. Big ticket items are housing, shocker, transportation, again, big for the town of Keystone, environmental, and we anticipate utilizing a third-party consultant to formulate these and do a tremendous amount of public reach out with regards to stakeholders and the citizens of Keystone. So with that being said, that is staff's suggestion with regards to this issue. Certainly, we could discuss some other alternatives, but I am of the belief that we do need master plans in the very near future in order to render some decisions based on established criteria. So with that being said, do you have any questions for staff? I did, with Maddie's help. All right, Maddie did it. Did names to go to countywide and Snake. Now, I'm going to apologize. I continuously forget that you were not versed in a lot of land use quite yet. You will be, and I need to do a better job with educating you. But with that being said, I would encourage you to read those plans, and for nothing else, to get a feel for the guidance, not regulatory suggestions. And again, you don't have to agree with every portion of the documents. In fact, the people that adopted these plans before weren't entirely not consistent, but on board with every policy. There was a give and take. And again, you can pick and choose from different elements of these master plans in order to fairly evaluate applications.
Councilman McKee.
Does the state statute put a time frame on the adoption of the master plan? Do they give a specific, we need to have something in place?
I do know. They don't even consider the concept of a new town. You just have to have it.
Okay.
So, yeah,
I think it
it's
looks
kind of
like if you
different.
have a planning and zoning commission,
Yeah.
you have to have a master plan.
If you're processing planning applications, you have to have a master plan, because
Right.
that's, otherwise, we're opening ourselves up to loss.
But it's not like a 90-day or there's not like an X amount of
No.
set.
State statute doesn't address anything when it comes to a new town. In that area. In fact, in most areas, they would agree. All the statutes based on something that is pre-existing, has been around for a while. Councilmember.
It could help if either of you could clarify to us, for us, if if we were in the absence of a comprehensive plan or master plan, as it were, how would the Planning and Zoning Commission make the decision?
We would look to Jennifer for an
But she
explanation
has
on
to have
why.
a document to go back to.
Well, exactly,
Not a-
but that's
no.
the point.
I
I
think
mean, one of your findings for approval is consideration of your master plans. So I personally do not know how to bridge that gap. I would imagine our town attorney could help answer that question. But quite frankly, I do not know how we could render a decision without adequate consideration of all the findings associated with that type of application, including, and not limited to, consideration of the master plans. For instance, another example would be, is the subject application, regardless of what it is, consistent with zoning? Well, hypothetically, if you hadn't adopted your land use and development code, I would be hard pressed to come up with that finding for you.
And in the absence of a plan, which is advisory in nature,
Yes, it
and
is.
which allows a certain amount of subjective decision-making.
Yes, it
But
does.
in the absence of that, it's entirely subjective, based on the individuals on the commission, right? Or their experience, or,
And I wish our attorney was here too, but I think it's kind of, there are still other criteria that
Yes.
we consider.
correct.
The point is, any decision wouldn't be, my belief is legally defensible.
Okay,
So let's say we deny someone based on a different criteria, even the fact that we didn't consider it in the criteria of the master plan would allow them to challenge legality of any decisions we make.
that looks like, if you would mind, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to spin this and look at it from the other perspective, and that is, Valerie, you were very passionately against this. Could you help us understand what your exceptions are, so whether we do want to take a beat or two?
Yeah. I think this sets, I mean, you're saying that we can't adequately consider certain developments unless we have a master plan. This master plan would serve as a point of reference for making some of those decisions. And I just don't feel strongly that some of these points made in this master plan, they need to be tested in the community to make sure they represent Keystone's needs and desires. For instance, when they talk about upzoning and to allow deed restricted housing units to create, wait, is that one? Hold on, I'm trying to find where it's written here. They talk about upzoning in relation to certain projects. And the aim is to increase development capacity, and the process of changing zoning codes is to permit taller and denser housing. And I just feel like if we're putting this in our master plan and we get a development that doesn't fit the character of Keystone, yet it's in our master plan, we're going to be compelled to approve it. So I think we need to go through this line by line and figure out, like we did with the planning and zoning code, if there are elements that we want to take out and reserve comment on until we have feedback from the community and have figured out what our goal and vision is. Because a lot of these are very defining for a goal and vision of a town.
I hear two different proposals here. One would be for the council and staff to go line by line, as we did with the land use code, and see if there's anything that doesn't meet the decisions we've made to date. But the other is to take time to pulse the community, which is a longer term process. If you could give us an example of what you're taking exception to, maybe you could help us weigh those two options.
I mean,
Or doing it now.
I think the upzoning is a big one. I think the policy on ADUs is another one. Have you guys read the ADU policy in here? I mean, there's a trend towards encouraging ADU units on any proposal that's proposed at the county level. And I think we need to do an assessment of Keystone to decide, is that something we want imposed on our entire community? Are there certain zones of Keystone that it makes more sense to consider ADU zoning? I,
I can see is that tying our hands, what she's referencing.
I don't, have to disagree, but I don't believe so. And again, it's a toolbox. You don't have to utilize that. I hear you. And I seriously understand where you're coming from with regards to what this potentially could do to open the floodgates. I question in the last 20 years plus, since these master plans have been utilized, and certainly for the last 14 years, likely longer, that those policies and goals have been in place, but yet we haven't seen them being
abuse.
not beyond what was currently allowed, I'm not, in fact, along with the accessory apartment portion of it, while I'm not convinced that this is an accurate statement, I have made that inquiry. How many accessory apartments are there legally approved in the new town limits? And it's very, very few. Not to say that there aren't illegal ones out there, but as far as accessory apartments, that policy has not been utilized.
But it also provides for the fact that if there are illegal units, they want to
Yes.
provide a pathway for people to be able to get those approved. And I just think that that's
Yes.
backwards to establishing policy and
And
requirements.
along those lines, just a little bit of history, that boiled back down to a health, safety, welfare issue. We knew that there were accessory apartments out there being in the units, permits were not pulled, and there was a concern by citizens that someone, and actually unfortunately has occurred, was injured or death resulted as a result of building codes not being utilized. So the idea behind that one master plan element was to bring things into conformity from a health, safety, welfare issue. Not necessarily, they will impact my neighbor.
But there are also unintended consequences of a policy like that. And again, I would refer back to the fact that if we can't make sound, defendable decisions without a master plan, and this is the master plan we're adopting, we better take the time to review it and make sure this is in line with what we at least think the community wants. Because from the beginning of it, our incorporation movement, one of our big points that we enforced to the community was that we don't like some of the developmental decisions that the county has made in Keystone, whether it's putting in big developments and not requiring those developers to make traffic and infrastructure improvements, or reducing the number of parking spaces that are required for any number of dense developments that the county has approved to put in Keystone. I just feel like this precedent is one that is going to be hard to reel back once we put it into place. There are things that I think are not in line with the anecdotal vision that I think Keystone has, and we need to be very careful about putting this precedent out there at all. And whether it's taking a couple of weeks and reviewing it and going line by line, like we did with the code, or starting from scratch, which doesn't sound like an option, I just think we need to be very careful in our approach in implementing something like this that would undoubtedly set a precedent for any developer that presents a project in Keystone.
Well, I disagree with that assessment. We're dealing with a land use code, comprehensive plans that have been in existence for 15 years. We're talking about keeping those in place for another 6 to 9 months. When we went through the incorporation process, we were very clear that our approach was to take the existing codes that we had, adopt them, and then go back in year 2, into year 1, year 2, and go through specifically and address those and tailor them for Keystone. In the next 6 months, what we have, if you start looking at what's on the agenda here in Keystone, we don't have any major workforce housing units coming in. And this stuff is advisory, it's not prescriptive. So you can also use the guidance that's in there that's out of character with the community, and sight lines and other things that are also in the master plan. So I think there's other ways to address this without harming the community And I would hate to put our name on a detailed line-by-line review and have it appear that this is what we think the community ought to have at this point, without getting broad community input and having it be a real plan that we can stand up to for the long term. So Councilmember Sullivan.
I want to get more from a practical perspective. Somebody comes in 2 weeks from now, wants an ADU. If we adopt this, it really is supportive of that. But, you kind of know we don't want to do that. And we say no. Because we adopted this, is that putting us in harm's way legally? You say no, because it's how would that work? And who would approve it?
Great questions. All right.
There's a lot of
One question, we gotta relate to that for me. Or I forget. But basically, it's a great way, and I don't think I'm gonna alleviate the concern entirely. However, there are other findings for approval or denial that are in every type of application. Potentially, I'm going to give one example for rezoning. Compatibility with adjacent properties. You could certainly, if you didn't believe in a policy or master plan for housing, you could go to another criteria and go, I think it will have an impact on the neighbor or the surrounding community, and you would base that on some sort of study, a traffic study or noise study or something. So there are other mechanisms to counter. Your sole criteria is not this neighborhood or countywide master plan. It's just part of the puzzle, if you will. And I believe that there are other elements in your findings for the various applications to certainly counter or bring another perspective to that. That was only part one.
Well, yeah, part two was in the interim. Who makes those decisions?
So on an accessory apartment,
Correct.
On the proposal.
On a proposal.
ultimately decision makers, ultimately, albeit if it's not accepted, then it will make its way through an appeal process up to council. It depends on the type of application. Could be me, which would be appealable. Could be your planning commission, which is either a recommendation, which you would hear, or a final decision, which is appealable. So at the end of the day, the buck stops with council.
If I may. So, do we have any zoning districts that allow ADUs?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have districts that don't allow ADUs?
That's a difficult question because of the amount of PUDs. There are 30 different PUDs in the town limits, and they're all written differently and at different times. So I'm not aware of any that specifically do not allow accessory apartments. But with that being said, accessory apartments aren't that easy to obtain, primarily because of what Valerie said. There are other parts in order to actually have a legal one, including tap fees and capacity. And the two districts, the sand district and the water district, only have a certain degree of capacity. And that, in essence, will dictate, quite frankly, how many additional units they can actually serve. So keep that in mind. That's sort of advanced, but that's the answer.
Councilmember Fisk.
And although you referenced that there aren't PUDs that don't allow ADUs, there are so many different HOAs with different policies. Our HOA does not allow ADUs, but it's my understanding that if for some reason somebody in our neighborhood were to propose and get approval for an ADU through the town, it would be incumbent upon our HOA to then go fight that, spend legal and time and monetary resources defending the fact that our HOA was designed as in such a spirit and character that it's in our bylaws and declarations that that's not permissible by our ADU. And so I just struggle with,
That is absolutely correct.
are we taking rights out of the hands of the HOAs and the individual neighborhoods?
No, you would trump, if you didn't want an accessory apartment, your HOA, albeit would have to, legally defend it. But again, keep in mind, your HOA has covenants, and when someone buys a piece of property in your subdivision, they know they can't have an accessory apartment. Just because another entity potentially would allow it, at the end of the day, your covenants stand.
And instead of debating the issue at this point, because this will be on the agenda in tonight's meeting, are there any other questions for staff at this point? Councilmember Davis.
I just want to clarify that this does not hamstring the Planning and Zoning Commission or the town council. And my second concern is, we've got this interim time while we do our homework and develop it. Having watched the county push through at least one development that is a concern. Do you have, I would be worried about that possibly happening. That a developer or developers taking advantage, and maybe the time zone is so short it wouldn't happen, but.
Let me try to answer that in an interesting way. I am not aware of the master plan, Snake, or any other master plan being utilized on its own and going beyond what is currently allowed by the zoning document. The zoning document, R1, whatever it is, sets the limits. I am not aware of a master plan policy that gave relief on its own. The zoning document trumps. Now they can apply and say, we need an extra 10 feet and it needs this plan and that plan. But again, that's subjective, and you have other tools in the toolbox to analyze that.
So in other words, someone could apply, and I'll use Kindred as an example. Kindred applied for an increase in height restrictions, I believe. And I believe that was denied by through the planning process and the architectural design review process as they went forward. So that they could apply for it. That doesn't necessarily mean it would get approved. And the only way it could have been approved would have been through an appeal process that would have ultimately ended with this body.
I believe you're correct in most of what you said. The processes are a little intertwined, but I believe you're
Yeah, in a typical municipality, you would be coming before the council, absolutely.
Councilmember.
Well, and I have a more specific question, because one of my primary concerns is being able to start addressing one of the big elephants in the room, and that's our traffic and our infrastructure that can't possibly handle too much more additional pressure because it's already an issue. So are there any accommodations in the code or this master plan that would allow us to deny a huge dense development based on, or put certain requirements in that say, if you're going to put this development in, you have to invest X number of dollars in a traffic study and improving our infrastructure to make this viable? Because I don't want to be part of a town council that has to approve more development when we haven't addressed the major issues that we have in Keystone, which are the traffic and the parking.
Interesting question. So if you are saying that hypothetically, there's a piece of property that is zoned PUD, and allows 10 units. That's what they're allowed. I mean, that is what they're allowed, just like a lot in North Fork is allowed 1 unit.
Yeah.
If they wanted to put 12 units, 2 more units on there, that is a upzoning, and it would require master plan consideration along with other development standards. So it is not a given. In my opinion, these master plans are designed not to promote density. In fact, the county as a whole has been, their policy is to restrict density, to whittle it down, if you will, not promote more density. Now, what I will say is Keystone in particular, a lot of the zoning / density that has been allocated to the various portions, including River Run, was done a very long time ago.
But how do we put requirements in our master plan and our code that requires any new development to address the traffic flow and parking?
So along those lines, when a development application comes to the town of Keystone, part of the submittal requirements are studies, traffic being one of them. A lot of other ones as well, wildlife impact, on and on and on. And at that point, we analyze or have it analyzed by a third party, these studies to see if they're valid.
Which, based on the precedent set by the county on their master plans and codes, have been insulting to the town of Keystone when they conduct a traffic study and call it valid on a Tuesday in September. So if they're just having to meet these basic requirements based on the code and the master plans that we're adopting, I would say it's inadequate. And what can we do to bolster this to make it actually meet the needs in the short run of our community instead of conducting business as usual, which clearly has not worked?
Councilmember Pugh.
Side question that may be crazy, but are we able to adopt a comprehensive plan and then put a limit on, like if we decided we're gonna just go with this for now, so we have something in writing, are we able to limit what sort of applications we're willing to take within the next 6 to 9 months while we hash out certain things? Can we say, yes, we'll go ahead and do this, but we're not taking applications for ADUs, we're not taking applications for particular things that we would like to spend more time on?
So partial moratorium.
I hate to use the word moratorium, but yes.
That's exactly what.
But yes, are we, is that something we could consider? That way we meet the state
I
needs,
would
we have
I
something in
would
place.
really appreciate the town attorney's position on that.
I think she,
Jennifer, are you online?
I think she is.
She's
online.
driving.
Because that would give us time to really dive into some of the major things while also giving us the ability to move forward. Right? In theory.
I guess it would be dependent upon what type of applications are pending. I have a pulse, however, I am getting calls literally on a daily basis now with regards to ideas, not necessarily proposals, but ideas. So, I will say, as I said before, a majority of your applications do have master plan consideration. The ones that don't, the main one
Modular in my neighborhood, in my neighbor's backyard.
nature with respect to density, I believe you will see a pending application. It is possible for you to see a pending application involving 12 units-ish. I don't know if that's major to you or not. 12 to 14.
It depends on the location and the implications for traffic.
Again, I can't talk.
But again, you would have a traffic, but am I correct that the town could take a position that said, hey, a traffic study in September is not an adequate look at the timing. We want that traffic study to be conducted in March or in February. If the county chose not to do that, but there would be nothing, I don't believe, that would prevent the town if they, in dealing with the developer, and said, hey, for this to be acceptable, it has to be during our peak period.
I think when you would be evaluating an application, you can certainly raise that question. And I think there could be a valid argument for that.
How do we make sure there's a valid argument based on our code and our master plan we adopt for the interim?
Because it's a guidance.
Isn't it
Did
the
you
role of
have
first
something?
the planning commission and then the
Yeah.
council?
Yeah. And
It's another writing.
I am confident staff and with the assistance of the town attorney can come up with a finding that supports that notion.
because in your master plan, you're not necessarily going to see the level of detail that I think you're looking for.
I mean, it's pretty detailed, this master plan.
But it does, all right, but let's defer future, if there are any other questions for staff, and then we'll be considering the resolution later this evening. Because we're not gonna vote on it, if we don't vote on it here.
I do have one question for the board. It's obvious we need to get our own master plan done sooner rather than later. I've been in touch with DOLA. There's a planning grant that covers 80% of the cost. The deadline for applying for this section is June 3rd. Would you, as a board, like me to go ahead and try to acquire that grant so we can? Yes.
Yes.
Welcome. So glad to have you.
I throw money at
All right, any other questions? All right, let's go on to the early childhood development IGA.
And I'm gonna handle this one. Just a quick background on this. I received just about within the last 2 weeks, an email from Shannon Haynes, who's the manager in Breckenridge. And she's all the managers and some of you council members too, as you get on these boards, you'll find out you take on chairman and secretary treasurer positions. So she wears a lot of hats these days. But she is working with the early childhood options on this First Step program, which my understanding is a first year program. They're going into their second year and are at this time working on their budget. Come on, open way. And wanted to know if Keystone would be interested in joining in. I have a lot of responses to that right now, given some of the other issues we've been talking about lately, but I'll keep those out of the conversation for now. I added to the report, or to the brief report, the background is a 4-page summary, and if you had a chance to look at it. But it essentially is a program giving families on a sliding scale based on gross wages and, how many do both parents work and all that. But it's a sliding scale of tuition assistance to get their children into daycare. This particular program is 6 months to 3 years. There's another program that is already funded that takes kids from 3 years through kindergarten. And but this is the one they worked on, they created it. It was a program put together after some needs assessments and towns and counties working together, as well as lots of people just from the community. And the suggestion was, and now it's in effect, to have this First Steps program made available. And again, tuition assistance, I understand Copper Mountain will be joining it this year. I don't know what their share will be, but or maybe it is in here. If you look at the charts, or at the, at the memo where I had the estimates, I now understand that if Keystone were to join, we would be probably a 3% entity coming in. And so just doing some really simple math and taking what Blue River's paying, and then, doing the math, our share would be approximately in the almost $37,000 area, which would be, again, put into the program for assistance with tuition. What I put this in here for is I want to respond, and we want to be good players in the county. I don't have a recommendation at this point. I don't think I could make a recommendation yet because we don't have all the information yet in hand. But I thought I'd at least run it by you guys now to see if there was interest in gathering additional information, negotiating with the rest of the group if necessary, and bringing back a proposal at some point in the future. So it's, I'll make this quick. I guess I'm just looking to see what, would you like us to continue to gather information and bring it back for a broader, more full discussion later? Do you want to defer for a year, maybe next year look at it? Do you want to, there's any option. You can even make a contribution if you want to do, not along the lines of what the formula might dictate, but maybe you decide, because there are a few families that live and work here in Keystone, maybe that would be at least a contribution to the program. And they do all the qualifying, the testing, the needs testing and all that. But there's a lot of options you might have. So you have that information in front of you, I'll just let you go.
Councilmember Sullivan?
A quick question, silly question probably, but the 5 families, whatever it is in Keystone, if we do nothing, they're still gonna get their subsidies?
Yeah, they can apply, yes, and they have been. So, even before this wasn't, I don't know if any of them got it here, but there would be no reason they shouldn't.
Councilmember Fisher?
Obviously, I think affordable childcare is a really important issue that Keystone's going to have to tackle. One of the questions I have relates to the source of this funding in each of the other towns. And I've seen in a lot of the affordable housing policy suggestions that there's some allocations related to mental health services, childcare, affordable housing. Could some of this funding potentially come from our 5A funding from the county if we were to receive that? Affordable housing fund, if the money that we could potentially get from them, would we be able to allocate that?
From 5A?
Yeah.
My guess is no.
So what is the source?
General fund.
Yeah, and what do we look like on the balance sheet? Is this realistic? Is this a risk we want to take?
The general fund surplus at the end of the year, if we go on track, will probably be in excess of $1 million this year. So at this point, it could be a consideration. I'm not sure I'm ready to say let's do it, but I would like to see more information about what they would, what the expectation would be. It would also show, as we're going through the SCHA issue right now, it would show that we are interested in partnering with all the other towns in the county, but we wouldn't be making a decision on this until we get more specific information about what the ramification of our participation is, of what the cost would be, projected cost would be for us. So, and then when we got that information back, then we could make a determination whether or not we want to participate. So basically, kicking down the road a little bit, let's get SCHA behind us, and then make a decision as we go forward. Councilmember Davis.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. I think we need more information, and, I think a little time to analyze this.
Any other thoughts? Councilmember.
Is there potential that if, once Keystone establishes a child care center, that some of this funding would be able to support a child care center? If we are part of this coalition, if you will, that we could possibly.
Yeah, from what I,
extend that to
yeah,
the
from what I've seen, all of the child, and I've seen, I think it was in the packet, or it was in a early childhood presentation I forwarded to all the council earlier from 2 months ago at a a month and a half ago from mayor manager's meeting. All of the child care centers in the county, although they're independent, there's some coordination going on with this nonprofit that we're talking about here. And the funding for scholarships goes out through this nonprofit, but it would go to the child care centers, all the child care centers in the county. If Keystone had one, it would be receiving the benefit of that as well.
Yeah, nobody gets cash, they get a voucher or something, the facility gets paid, and then the kid gets the credit.
But it could be potentially extended to a future facility in Keystone.
I don't think it has to do with the facility, it has to do with the individual and where that child is. So if there were one of the 5 families who are currently using a different childcare facility, in the future, they might use ours and the money would flow that way.
I just wanted to make sure we.
But I think you have pointed out that there are a lot of things we don't understand about that housing budget. It talked about a minuscule portion of the mill levy and multiple other sources of income, funds for them. So I think we don't have an adequate grasp on our budget to be committing to this budget that we don't actually grasp on.
And that's
Agreed, but I would just suggest that we get more information first, and then we can make those decisions.
And we'll have more information on the status of our budget as we go forward
Exactly.
in this year. In the next week, I would expect to see the March sales tax numbers come in, and that will really be the big indicator for us of where we are. It was a budget of $480,000 there. And if we're anywhere close to that, then we're golden for the rest of the year.
I just want to, I want to say for sure we need some more information, and I just want to mirror what Dan said earlier, like, let's make sure those 5 families are going to be covered by somebody in the county. If we don't participate until next year, or we extend it, I would hate to see those 5 families just because we're thinking about it. Let's make sure they're going to be covered by the county, or I think there's one line where the Summit County pays 10% or something. So let's just make sure that they're still going to be covered under that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you go about guaranteeing people from here get covered, because they have to apply, there's a board that, they have.
I don't want them to be denied because Keystone didn't participate.
Right.
Well, apparently they can't possibly because they're getting, what do they call these, scholarships to people who don't live in the county, but maybe they work for the county, it's unclear.
Yeah, some are going to
So I
Park
think they're
County.
pretty open-minded about how they go about this.
Just confirm.
We need information
More
about
information.
So please let them know we're very interested, we're not ready to commit, but we like more information.
Yes.
Is there any other discussion on this? Do you have enough guidance to go forward? All right. Now to the long subject. Discussion of short-term rental licensing. And with that, I'll turn it over to the town manager, who's immediately going to put it over to the town clerk, I believe.
Should we have a word more since he was here
They're all warmed up.
Is Stuart here?
Yeah.
before we dive into it?
All right, shall we, did I hear a thought for a recess for 15 minutes? At 6 o'clock, is that acceptable?
Mr. Mayor, before we do that, it looks like Councilmember Parmet is on the line and might want to make a comment on the last discussion.
Could you then change the view so we can, is he on video?
He does not have his video on. I don't know if he has, if he wants his video.
The video,
He looks like he's
I don't-
unmuted now.
There he is.
are you able to hear me?
Councilmember Parmet, and if you have your video, we'd appreciate it if we could see you.
I would love to, but I don't think I have the connection for that.
We can't hear it.
And
What is it?
since I am able to add in, I just wanted to say I too would be very interested to see how our participation in that program could be developed. And I absolutely agree with Sarah that we should ensure that the folks that are currently covered remain covered, because that would be a tragedy if it were to be suddenly discontinued.
All right, now back to the discussion of recess. Any objections to recess till 6? Hearing none, I declare us in recess till 6 p.m. Are we up?
We are live.
In that case, I will call the meeting back into order. The next item of business is the discussion of short-term rental licensing policies. With that, I'll turn it over to the town manager, who I assume will go to the town clerk.
I will immediately turn this over to Maddie, our town clerk, and I assume Jennifer will participate.
All right, so I tried to provide a comprehensive overview of kind of the existing STR policies that exist in Summit County right now and what's applying to STR licenses within the town of Keystone currently, to kind of give everyone an overview of what that looks like. So I don't want to go too in-depth into outlining each of those pieces again, but just a note that the IGA outlines currently, the most recent addition to that IGA outlines that we plan to take over this process for the renewals on September 30th of 2024. So with all of that in mind, we tried to think of plans as a staff about how we could approach this with that September 30th deadline in mind. And just recognizing that this is going to be a big lift for several reasons, but including that we're going to need to get some sort of technology and software to implement. And typically implementation timelines for software and technology packages can be in that 4 to 6 month range at a minimum. So this is going to be a really tight turnaround time for us to consider this as we create these STR ordinances, to just consider how we can make that process of considering the ordinance line up with the actual implementation of pieces. So currently, Summit County has 2 different zones, or a couple different zones, with a primary distinction between the resort overlay zone and then other zones within Summit County. And all of the current town of Keystone town limits is within the resort zone overlay. And so for that reason, the memo primarily focused on their processes for that resort overlay zone. A couple of considerations and questions that we've got for town council is kind of direction on what you envision the STR code looking like. If there are departures from the Summit County code, what that would be, and what you kind of want to see in a first draft of that code, with the plan of hopefully bringing that back for a work session kind of in the next 1 to 2 meetings, so that we can work on implementing the code by the first meeting in July, which is an ambitious timeline, but taking on all of these licenses by the end of September is an ambitious timeline as well, and being able to work with those technology companies and say, here are the guidelines, here's what we need in the application process, and outlining that by that time point in July is going to be critical to making this launch actually work. And so from a staff perspective, I just want to be able to do everything I can to say, we know that we'll be able to make this implementation work on that timeline. And so that's the considerations there. The other piece with the technology is what we would like some of those compliance pieces to look like. and what desire you'd like for software to do enforcement. Currently, the county is using Granicus for both their licensing process and the compliance piece of things. We have heard very mixed reviews about what that process is working like and how that's working for users of that system. And so I kind of outlined what the existing 24/7 hotline functions like and how many listings, the data scraping that the Granicus company can provide as well. And so there is one other company that we've identified that will do some of those compliance pieces. And John has actually said that he worked with them in Grand Lake, and that was GovOS. I have not received a full quote from them yet on what those pieces would look like to implement, just those enforcement pieces if they're not able to do the turnaround for the licensing administration. But I will get that quote by tomorrow. And I also spoke with the town of Breckenridge earlier today to kind of find out some more information about GovOS. And they have been very happy with their services from GovOS and have suggested that it has worked out really well for them on the enforcement piece. And I can't really compare numbers between those two specific pieces, just because I don't have both quotes yet. But then the alternative for the other enforcement piece is the company Blue Vector AI. They have an app called Snap App, which we're recommending generally for the licensing administration of processing STR licenses, because they're able to meet that turnaround timeline of implementing the licensing by September 30th and offering the main things that we would need for the licensing administration. But for the compliance piece, what they're able to offer, which we could use as an add-on, or we could only use the licensing part of that software, but the add-on would be a chat flow with a kind of like an AI chat bot that allows residents to put in those complaints 24/7 and request all that necessary information to make the report, but people wouldn't be speaking to a live person. And it's a little bit unclear at this point what the escalation of that would look like, because for the 24/7 hotline offered by Granicus and offered by GovOS, there's some escalation where the hotline will reach out to the responsible agent and get that affirmative confirmation within 1 hour, which is a part of the code that exists right now in Summit County. So it's unclear whether or not we would be able to support that level of back and forth with the chatbot, but we would be able to take in all of those complaints and then respond to them during business hours.
Questions, comments? Councilman Sullivan.
They said a timeline. Can some of those components be done afterwards? I mean, like the scraping, that doesn't have to be done by September, right?
I would say that that's a council decision of when the implementation for that piece could be done. I think that we could get the licensing administration up and focus on that first and make sure that that works and then focus on the compliance pieces. But ultimately, that would be the decision of folks above me.
Well, my worry was that I'm just thinking about the timeline, because you say it's for short. And that we should be prioritized to ensure that we make that September deadline. Would that help a lot? Or, I mean, I don't know the risk, how much risk we are at right now, given that this is, not that many more months.
So generally speaking, the licensing administration piece is going to be the bigger lift to actually get done, and that's where the bulk of the work is going to happen in this transition. We have a lot of data that we've taken in from Summit County, but we're going to need to clean that data up a lot before we can bring it over to a new system, regardless of what that system is. The 24/7 complaint hotline and data scraping, they can kind of turn those on with certain pieces. The caveat to that being, if you are not using the same system for your data scraping that you are using for your licensing administration, that will still be a very manual process at some level to double check the two systems against one another.
So I think what I heard is that it wouldn't really buy us, more, give us less risk by just pushing those off, a month or two, because you're gonna just do the administration first, worry about the other stuff. I don't want to force you to put all these things on and the same people have to do it if we have to have the administration by September.
Right, I think that it would happen in the order of the licensing administration and then implementing these pieces once we've taken on those licenses. Okay. Either way, because we're not doing the enforcement until September 30th.
Okay.
Other questions? Councilmember Keel.
So I think what I'm reading here is that you're recommending that we honor the licenses that expire this year, right? And then going through a more thorough review process next year. Is that what I'm reading?
Mm-hmm. Not necessarily, unless there was something that changed dramatically in the code moving forward that required a more intensive renewal process. We would still be expecting folks to go through a renewal process this year, and they would need to meet the standards that they have been meeting, unless we implemented a change to the STR code that was not consistent with that currently. If the STR code that gets passed prior to this implementation looks very different from the Summit County ordinance, that would make the renewal process look a little bit different. But if the ordinances are very similar, then the renewal process would generally be similar from that perspective.
Okay, so what's the bare minimum that you need to get through September? A system?
A system and a code to know what to input into the system.
Right.
And she would like to have a decision on whether we would like in the next year to do the data scraping and the hotline. Now that wouldn't be do the data scraping and the hotline from an enforcement perspective.
Whether to do it at all?
Yeah, whether to do it at all. You could choose not to do it.
And then what's the thing regulations?
The regulation would then probably go to the town staff when people call the staff and complain.
Sorry.
Oh, that's Councilman Davis.
I think you definitely need a hotline. I think that says something to the people that live here. And I also think you don't want Elvis calls. I personally, and we're not looking at numbers, so this may be pie in the sky, would like to be able to talk to a person on this hotline. My theory is if we're gonna have these regulations, then the people that live in my neighborhood need to follow them, and I have no compunction about calling and making a complaint if there is a blatant violation. I've never had a problem having someone answer the phone. Now, I'm not calling every week. I think I've called twice. I said blatant. That would be my recommendation.
Other comments or questions? Councilmember Kerr.
Thank you. Quick question and then a bigger question. So do you know how many licenses need to be renewed at the end of September 2024?
It's right around 2,000.
Yeah.
All of them?
Yeah,
Well, they all get renewed every year, but they're 2,000 here, right?
no, they all renewed at the same time.
Yeah.
But I read this to say that if they initiated it during 2024, it wasn't due for renewal till the end of 2025.
So that would be folks who applied for a new license between January 1 and now, which Summit County has said is a handful of folks.
Okay.
So there would only be a few people who would be recognized until 2025. If there were major departures to the code, I think my recommendation for what we do with those people might change, but.
Okay, I'm sorry, I understand better now. So my understanding is you're,
Councilmember Sullivan,
I'm sorry.
come back.
Yeah, that's okay.
You get 1 chance.
Keep your hand up, though. If I recall, I think you said that the AI tool would not allow us to go with the current code because of the timeframe requirements, right?
It
You have to respond in an hour. I think I read something like that.
So the chatbot could reach out to the responsible agent, and then we could look to see if the responsible agent sent in some sort of response within that 1 hour to comply, but there wouldn't be that real human double checking that piece in the same way as someone calling the responsible agent, hearing back from the responsible agent that evening.
Okay. Are you looking for the council later today to make a decision about the software, or?
I'm looking for some direction on those pieces as soon as possible, because getting the software decisions made in the next month is going to be critical to that implementation.
I think there's a couple, well, Councilmember Curry, I interrupted you before. Go ahead.
I wanted to make sure I understood, we all understand what happens when someone makes a complaint. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical. It's 1 a.m., a neighbor decides to complain on an STR home. So if it were Granicus at 1 a.m., will they get a human? And then the human will contact a responsible agent who will come back to the human at Granicus, yes?
So for Granicus and GovOS, they reach a call center, they're put into a call queue. I have heard that both companies have had, less coverage over the evening. That doesn't mean that the companies are not available over the time from midnight to 6 a.m., but they have less agents working in the call center. So people might hit a voicemail. The phone typically for both services is going to ring for about 15 minutes. If a call agent doesn't pick it up in 15 minutes, then that's going to go to voicemail, and then they'll get a call back.
And the alternative would vector is you're going to input a digital report. And that inside that integrated system, the AI will be able to check who is the responsible agent and send an email to them?
Yes.
As opposed to a phone call?
Yes, and that conversation flow can be developed by us with Blue Vector to kind of say, here is all of the input that we're going to need to be able to make that complaint and have the information that we need. And so it's possible that we could develop it to work really well, but I honestly don't know what that would look like in terms of how effective an email versus a phone call is in reaching a responsible agent.
But in the end, the critical part is if the responsible agent doesn't get the STR renters or the owner to change something. So eventually, do they both come to you?
Yes.
At this point, thank you for taking on this responsibility. You can't actually take any actions other than alerting them in the middle of the night, right? So doesn't this become a daytime event
No.
as far as
No.
following through?
If there's noise complaints or other things, if that a responsible agent is contacted,
Yes, that's.
they are required to respond and resolve the issue within 1 hour.
So perfect example. Is it possible to code the software just as they coded the humans in these other places to say, if I don't get a response within an hour to a noise violation, then either way, either the human or the AI contacts the sheriff's office?
I am not positive, but we do have someone on the line who can speak to the capabilities of Blue Vector in terms of that chatbot, if you all are open to hearing from them.
I'd like to. Should be on.
All right, Sumner, if you are on the line, can you speak to what the process of escalating things with the chatbot would be in terms of being able to reach out directly to the sheriff's office or
Yes.
to another human after that 1 hour?
Absolutely. So the way that the agent works is when somebody reaches out, and it doesn't necessarily have to just be limited to complaints. What the agent does is it recognizes the intent of that person's conversation. So whether that's submitting a complaint, submitting a noise request, having some sort of other issue, or even, asking about an STR license, the status of their license, how do they renew? What we can do is we can use this agent to direct them to not only the right person, but the right place. So let's say, for example, we need to then route that person's call or text message to the police. If we need to route them to an applicable town member, if we need to route them to a website or a different service that the town is going to provide, we can use this agent to direct them to the correct place, as well as facilitate the passover of that person from a conversational perspective to the applicable team member.
And Sumner, what does that look like over the period of after an initial complaint comes in, the software connects with the responsible agent. If the person doesn't respond to that complaint, does the chatbot have the ability to say, it's been 1 hour, now escalate to XYZ?
Yes. So yes, absolutely. There's different ways that we can handle either time-based or event-based action triggers, which basically means if we want to say that after an hour, we want to escalate it to a certain person or a different group, if we want to then store that to the database so that first thing in the morning, somebody else can come in and see, all of the complaints that were escalated over the course of the evening. There's a number of different ways that we can handle that. And it would really be up to your team to decide, how do we want to configure this to make sure that we're pushing it to the right people at the right time? Does that answer your question?
In the middle of the night, how do you ensure the responsible agent will even see an email?
Well, we can't, unfortunately, force people to be looking at their phones. What we can do is we can kind of blast them on multiple avenues. We can send an email, we can send a text message, or we can even have this AI-driven agent call their phone and make a phone call to that person. So there's a number of different ways that we can perform that notification. Again, it would really be up to you in terms of to what extent do we want to, try to get that person on the line.
And when could you guarantee this capability would be available online?
Well, I think, what I'm hearing right now is that, there may be some things that we'd want to investigate. Typically, we can do these sorts of agents in under 3 months. So my hope would be that we would be able to deploy something of this nature before that September 30th timeline. But I think it would be worthwhile for us to sit down and really dig into exactly what you're looking for. And then I could give probably a more specific timeline for getting that agent live.
And how would this work interact with the other work of bringing the licensing function on board?
That's a great question. So the cool thing about this is we can actually start to tap into the licensing information using this agent. So for example, as somebody who's applying for an STR license or renewal, instead of having to call someone from the town or a staff member, we can instead have them reach out to this virtual agent. And then what the agent can do is it can gather a little bit of information and give them updates on status, any materials that they may be missing, next steps, timelines, things of that nature. So the cool thing is you can start to use this agent to be kind of that front desk receptionist that's not only fielding calls and text messages, but also then providing information back specific to that person, as well as directing them to other sites or services that they're requesting.
Anyone else? Questions? Councilmember Davis?
I would say, there's 144 units at my HOA, and I would say our biggest violation is the responsible agent being in some other town. And that is not within an hour. And, I've told my property manager, turn him in. But if we're not gonna do anything about it, then it's not worthwhile. And my other concern, I don't know what this sounds like or looks like, but if I picked up the phone and I got a computerized thing, I'd probably hang up. I'm not sure. I just don't know how,
Councilmember Sullivan?
Real quick question. The call center ones, the other guys, are they domestic? Or are they?
I believe they're both based in North Carolina.
Okay.
Another question? Councilmember Kerr?
Is there a requirement for the responsible agent to be available in person or, by the phone 24/7?
Yes.
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 And yet you say it doesn't happen.
I say that some of my owners ignore that.
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
So it does happen if they have like a Summit Code or
Right.
Oh.
some of those absolutely happens. And I've been known to skip the complaint and go right to the rental management company. They respond, but it's these one-offs that are doing the VRBOs or the Airbnbs.
Approximately half of the 2,000 units are managed by 3 rental management companies. The rest tend to be much smaller and tend to be more one-offs. One of the enforcement issues that I would expect us as a town to take on, that the county really hasn't taken on, is precisely that issue, because there is a 1-hour response. And if that response did not happen as a result of the call, that's a violation of the STR. There's potential for fines, and there's potential for suspension or revocation of the STR license. And that has not been heavily enforced by the county. I would expect the town to get more involved in the enforcement side. I would expect if we had a voice system or you had a call center person involved, you would have more track record of that, of what's happened. And the town would then get involved in the enforcement action when they violated the time frames. Yes, Councilmember Keel.
Maddie, just to clarify, you said Granicus would take how long to set up?
So for the licensing administration piece, they said that they are on an 8-month backlog. For the other enforcement pieces, they are not on the same backlog. But I would also say that we should heavily consider GovOS as an option for the enforcement piece as well. And I will have a more firm timeline and numbers from them. I do generally know that their numbers are lower than Granicus's, and everyone I've talked to from other communities that's used GovOS has been really happy with their enforcement.
From both sides, from the applicant, from the okay.
Yeah, let's put this into 2 pieces. First piece is the license processing piece. And the question is, the staff recommendation, I believe, was to go with Snap App for the license processing. That would also get us starting into the AI world a little bit as well. And
we can see how it works.
And we can see how it works as well. Can we give direction to staff for that portion to go forward with SNAP app? Councilmember Pugh.
Will that cause additional complications with having more than one entity involved? I mean, is it gonna be just crazy and not communicate? I mean, is it gonna be a problem if we're going one way with half of it and another way with the other half?
There will be pieces of it that are more manual because you're comparing. So when a system works together with its enforcement piece, it's comparing it to the database that it has on hand. It can't compare it to the database it has on hand. It would generate a report for us to look at. If we can get the data really clean before we put it into SNAP App and make the fields match so that they talk to one another, and the fields that we're getting from whoever the enforcement agency is the same as the fields that we have in SNAP App, that will eliminate some pieces of that, but inherently there's going to be a little bit of manual process. Timeline-wise, I just don't foresee a big company that's a big player in the SDR game being able to get this implemented and implemented well. And I respect that this is a priority of council and members of the public to kind of get this done before September 30th. And I don't want to be over-promising in my ability to do that with other people.
So again, any other questions? Is the council okay with going with the staff recommendation to pursue SNAP App for the processing piece?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yes. All right, you've got that decision. The other question, the next two questions are the 24-hour hotline, pursuing that to hopefully line up with the implementation, but if it was delayed, it would matter tremendously, particularly on September 30th this evening. Would the council like to have a 24-hour hotline or go into a development role with SNAP App to put a chatbot capability in? Councilmember Peel.
I would say that given that there's only been 17 complaints, that we should try to do the chatbot. And we're not talking such an insane amount that it would be an overwhelming amount of data to get. I mean, we're talking 17 calls, and that covers our peak period.
Part of the problem that we have today is because the county does not enforce that people don't call. I would project that if the county, if we got involved in enforcement, that number would go up. Councilmember Kerr.
I hope it would, appropriately, and I think it is our job to publicize that very well. But I like the way Councilmember Kill just laid this out. We are not inundated at this point, and I think it sits with our initial impetus that we wanted a modern 21st century kind of approach that wasn't so entirely manpower driven. If we could get some AI to take a little off our plate, I think it's worth giving the staff recommendations to pursue. And here's what I'd like to see. We don't have comparative costs yet, right?
But we do have a cost estimate for Granicus, and we have a cost estimate for Granicus.
So, but we're looking at three options. One is gov.os, or the opposite, os.gov. One is Granicus, and one is the Blue Vector tool. I would also like to have them explain what kind of reports we would get, because a comment was made that we would get much better insights from a call center than we would from an AI tool. I'd like to be persuaded of that. So that's something worth asking some questions about.
Perhaps could I just shed a little bit of light on that?
Perhaps we could do that another time, Summer?
Yes. So the cool thing about the AI agent is that it's built with AI. And so what you can actually do is you can start to perform analysis, not just on what topics are most commonly, are people calling in about, but we can start to investigate the sentiment of those calls. How happy are people with the agent? How happy are people with the services that are being provided? As well as your kind of common metrics around basic call volumes, where are people calling, why are they calling? We can gather all of that information and actually put that back into Snap App for you to visualize and report on. But you can also start to do really interesting AI analysis around, well, how well is this working? How happy are people? And that also helps to inform you on how can we continue to optimize the experience that people have so that over time we can just make it better and better. So I just wanted to throw that in there, that because it's a data-driven agent, you're going to get a lot of really useful and interesting data out of it as well.
Okay, well,
Councilmember Pfister?
I typically detest having to talk to a robot, but I think in this application, well, whatever, getting a phone call from an automated phone call sometimes is very offensive to me. But I think if we share that on the front end, that is how we're operating and inform these managers that that's what they can expect if they get a complaint and they need to be receptive and know what to expect, I think is viable. And given the low number of complaints that we've had, I think it's maybe a much more economical place to start. And then if we find through our assessment that it's not working, there's low confidence, low approval of the system, then we can maybe shift to an in-person hotline. But I would venture to say that an in-person hotline would be much more cost prohibitive than this option.
well, we don't.
As a matter of fact, the cost figures that I've heard so far indicate that this these chatbot cost options for the first year would be more than the cost option for the online. What I would prefer to see is to go with the online system and continue to develop the chatbot system, do that in parallel. And then we can evaluate if based on the data that we're gathering on the online system, if we need to continue it into the future.
I think that makes eminent sense. I will ask this one question. Do you think that the higher cost for the chat approach is because of development costs that they have to capture in their
But
first
that's
year?
a big one.
Okay, so over time, that would not be true.
Over time, that may not be true.
Okay.
As we go forward. I'm concerned about, he indicated this is an easy do. That isn't the feedback I got from Rick earlier today. All right. And so I have some concerns about implementation of this. One of the things that we promised people during the incorporation process is we would have strict enforcement. And if their ability to get quick response to complaints at night doesn't happen, then we have a major credibility problem. Councilmember Davis.
I'll tell you what happens if there's failure. It falls on the HOA. And if we're going to implement something, it shouldn't fall on the HOA.
So I
But
think.
I don't know which one's gonna work better.
So are you suggesting a hotline in opposition to the AI?
Absolutely. I would recommend additionally going with the hotline of continuing to pursue in this area because there's more to that chatbot than just the complaint aspect that he addressed. He also addressed broader things associated with that chatbot that it would do. And then then we can evaluate where we want to go in the long term and what's best for.
I don't understand that. They're gonna ask us to develop that chatbot.
But the chatbot he talked about had a lot of other functions than just the complaint hotline. He was talking about evaluation. The chatbot was used to help evaluate license applications, that sort of thing. I think that's tremendously valuable.
Yes.
The application of the.
Oh, I see. So that's going to
So
happen
short
anyway.
of that,
That
it'll be.
needs to happen.
I didn't
But are
want
we
to
paying
double up.
double? Are we paying double for
Yeah,
that? I mean, that's what I'm wondering. We're talking about.
I question whether this would be ready in time to support the season, have the bugs.
I can tell you that to do a simple agent that would just intake complaints, I've done other projects of similar complexity that we were able to build and deploy in 8 weeks.
You're not talking to a person, you're not talking to a person.
You mean right now?
What? Chatbot's not.
Right, so he's saying in 8 weeks, he could put together a chatbot for the simple, very specific complaints issue, and then over time, if we wish, he could extend it into the other things that can just.
But if we
make
go with
up
an
the
in-person phone call, while they're also developing this for us, are we double paying? I think that was the question. Are we paying for both services at the same time?
You have, as I heard the discussion, there is several aspects that chatbot function can perform. I think the priority of that ought to be on the licensing and the preparation. Later, we could evaluate whether it was worthwhile to go forward with the chat box for the complaints. I just am concerned about the ability of a chat box to get our response in the evening. I just don't know how that's gonna happen.
But we still, I don't feel like we got the answer. So are we, if we're dual pathing, are we paying double? You didn't answer? I didn't quite hear.
Perhaps we
In the
could
first,
ask staff to
in the first
look into
year,
that.
the answer may be partially yes. There potentially could be some double, but I would put the emphasis initially on the license processing part for the chat box, and then focus on the other as we see what happens with the online hotline.
And I would argue that if we're going to be all in on a system and try to invest and work out the bugs, I would support.
I don't want to have failure on the side of, I don't want to have a failure on the side of enforcement that's visible to the community as we implement this.
How are you measuring enforcement though? Because based on the threshold that's already been set, the bar's pretty low apparently.
We enforce it. We have control of enforcement when we take over. The county is the one who hasn't been enforcing.
Well, also, I mean, we have here from Maddie and the team that a lot of people have difficulty reaching the 24/7 hotline to begin with. So it seems like trying to reach a human is not 100% effective as it is.
Well,
So it seems like there's error on either side. I mean, if there's already frustration in the community with trying to reach a human 24/7, maybe we should be proactive and say, hey, we may have some issues, but we're trying to do better than.
Yeah.
well, let me ask a question of the interim town, or the town manager. I believe Grand Lake uses GovOS.
Yeah.
Do you use their hotline function?
Yes,
How effective is that?
we,
I don't know the answer.
you know, there'll be a lot of people who won't even bother to call that, and will just call the town the next day and complain about their neighbor's house. Why?
So if there's already frustration, then
Yes.
why not try something new?
And, to really, what I would recommend, is that you let staff look into the cost of if we try to do this. I think we absolutely need to go with, the AI for licensing. It's our only option to get it done in time. And I give staff a couple more weeks to look into what the cost of hybrid programs as opposed to this program would be, and we can bring that back with the ordinance.
And I think you've heard a lot of questions and concerns here that you could pass on to both of the vendors and see how they respond. And then we'll all be in a better position to make decisions.
Councilmember.
Not to put more on you, Maddie, but can we also see, what the complaints for like the whole of last year look like? I'm wondering when it starts to pick up. I mean, are these 17 that we got this year, is that what it looked like last year? You know, are we getting a lot of complaints from September to January that's gonna inundate the system right off the bat? Can we just get a fuller picture of what the whole year looks like, so we can know when it's gonna ebb and flow. Because we may have some time here where we're starting something and we're not even getting any complaints for a month or so. So,
We're running out of time. The second question they asked was the data scraping question. And that is something the chatbot, that Snap app does not do.
Correct.
And we have direction to allow them to do the data scraping function.
To allow who to do it.
Yeah.
A contractor, either Granicus or whoever the staff is.
So would that decision be tied to the other decisions, or could that
No,
be a
that's-
standalone? Because I think all along we've talked about,
Could be standalone.
we could try that out to see if it's worth cost benefit analysis when we've had year under our belt, right?
The whole intent is get us through the first year, then do a comprehensive review of everything in the SDR side, including all the processes and the regulations, and then go through a public process to come up with permanent regulations for the town.
Okay.
So, so at least I think you have guidance that says, at least data scraping, do evaluation, get more information on the 24-hour hotline. And did anyone have any major changes they wanted to see in the STR regulations?
Yeah, I'd really rather not rush through this part.
No, but the question is, are there major concerns with those STR regulations to give staff some guidance in the next 2 weeks on what they ought to be presenting to us next time?
I don't know if this would be something we would build in now, but I definitely think we need a staff review of the license fees, what we're looking at taking over from county, because our cost structure will be different than counties. And the whole point of those fees is to cover our costs, both technical and personnel.
And the impacts is also considered part of that cost.
Yeah.
I could justify that $280 just on enforcement and the law enforcement.
Exactly. Along those same lines, again, I don't know if this is in your lane, but I think it's worth us taking a look at the fees for offenses. Because a $250 fee, when given the amount of money that is coming in rentals, is hardly a disincentive necessarily. Can't speak for other people. And the third point I wanted to bring up in this little bit of time we have available to us is that the county's, what do they call that code? The county's ordinance is very negative on SDRs. There are multiple references to how detrimental SDRs are to the county culture. I don't think that's our position. Is that our position?
No.
No. So perhaps part of what you do could be to look at how could we soften or pull out some of those references. I don't know who's going to be doing this. I could pass this on.
adjusting the tone.
Yeah.
Adjusting the tone is
Yeah,
exactly it, but
the-
because it shows up multiple times, it deserves to be addressed.
Councilor Mephisto.
I don't know if this is appropriate, Jennifer might correct me, but is there any way we can put a line in there that addresses the power of HOAs? And I'm thinking specifically in regards to where they're talking about the number of allowable parking spots, that it also has to be in accordance with HOA policy, because I think it's important. We have so many different neighborhoods.
Yeah. All right.
And one last.
All right.
I don't know if we'll be discussing the good neighborhood guidelines, but I'd like to pass on a few recommendations.
Well, why don't you give that offline?
Yes, exactly.
If anyone
Who am
has,
I giving it
if
to?
anyone has recommendations, I'd recommend you provide those recommendations offline to Manny for consideration for incorporation.
Will do, thank you.
That's acceptable. Does that give you enough to go on, Manny?
Yes.
All right. With that,
Justin, sorry, for citizenships.
and did we answer the questions you needed to have answered today?
Yes.
All right, with that, we have the I would ask that we have a discussion of manager council issues. We also have a place for that in the council meeting soon to begin. And I'd recommend we defer anything there to the council meeting. And with that, unless anyone has any questions, and I'm seeing none, council member, I'm going to declare this meeting adjourned.
Okay, here we have 5 minutes before. we
Yeah,
start.
and we'll delay start of the meeting. We'll start the council meeting at 7:05. And please let the people online know that we